"He has drugs!" The shout tore through the terminal like a siren. Heads snapped, phones lifted. For one fractured second, Chicago O'Hare wasn't just an airport, it was a theater, and all eyes were locked on a single man. Two officers lunged forward, uniforms crisp, hands on cuffs and batons. One of them, gray-haired, veins rising in his neck, barked louder than the PA system. "Step back. Don't move. You're under suspicion." Passengers froze in line, luggage forgotten, boarding passes half crumpled in their hands. Murmurs spilled into the air. Did he just say drugs? Is that real? Someone record this. And someone did. Then another. Within seconds, half a dozen camera phones blinked red dots, capturing the scene from every angle. In the middle stood the man they targeted. A black man in a slate-gray suit, no entourage, no lawyer at his side, just calm. His shoulders didn't twitch. His breath didn't quicken. He didn't plead. He watched. The officer with the handcuffs jabbed a finger toward him, lips curling as if conviction was already stamped. "You think you're slick? You're done today." The crowd leaned in, eager for the spectacle. Some horrified, some hungry. The rhythm of prejudice was as old as the marble floor beneath their feet. But this man, he didn't fold. Not here. Not now. His eyes tracked the officer, steady as stone, a silence so sharp it cut louder than the accusation. The younger officer stepped forward, baton tilting. "Bag inspection, now!" The suitcase was yanked from beside him, tossed open like trash. A puff of powder, planted, rehearsed, theatrics for an audience too far to tell. Gasps rippled through the terminal. "There it is. Evidence," the gray-haired officer crowed. People stepped back. Mothers pulled children close. A businessman whispered, "That's it for him." And yet the man in the gray suit didn't flinch. He straightened his jacket, eyes calm as if rehearsing a different ending, because he had one. He took a single step forward, enough to silence the shuffle of the crowd. His voice was low, controlled, each syllable placed like a stone on water. "Are you sure about that?" The officer smirked, raising the cuffs like a trophy. "Yeah, I'm sure." But the room, no. The entire terminal felt something shift, a pause, a waiting, the kind of silence that comes before lightning, because this man wasn't who they thought he was. And in a matter of seconds, everyone in that terminal would find out. He didn't look like trouble. No gold chain, no entourage, just a tailored gray suit, pressed clean, and shoes polished enough to catch the terminal lights. To most, he blended in another business traveler waiting to board. But to these officers, he was something else. Suspicion wrapped around him like a preset script. The crowd whispered, "Why him? Look at his bag, nothing special. Maybe they know something we don't." But the truth was simpler. Too simple. They saw his skin before they saw his badge. He exhaled slowly, steadying his shoulders. He'd seen this movie before. At 23, fresh from grad school, he'd been stopped at this very airport. Same accusations, different uniforms. Back then, he carried nothing but a backpack and ambition. They made him sit in a back room for 3 hours, rifled through his notebooks, even flipped through the letters of recommendation he'd worked so hard for. No apology, no explanation. Just, "You can go now." That memory was still with him. It didn't weaken him. It sharpened him. Now, standing in the same airport decades later, he was no longer the kid with papers and dreams. He was the man who signed contracts that kept these terminals alive. And yet prejudice hadn't learned its lesson. The older officer snapped again, louder this time. "Hands where I can see them." He obeyed. Calm, precise. Not because he feared them, because he was giving them rope. A young man in the crowd muttered, phone lifted high. "He's not resisting. Why are they pushing this?" A woman beside him whispered, "Because they think he can't push back." The officer holding the baton sneered, leaning close enough for the cameras to catch it. "See that look? Guilty. Every time." But the man in the gray suit didn't blink. His eyes were steel. His silence was strategy. He straightened, speaking for the first time with words colder than the terminal air. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The officer scoffed, already convinced. "Yeah? Then enlighten us." But he didn't. Not yet. The reveal wasn't for them. It was for everyone watching, the passengers, the phones, the world waiting to see whether dignity could hold its ground against bias. And so he stood, unshaken, letting the accusations swirl like storm winds around a pillar that refused to crack. The storm was building, and his silence was the calm before it broke. "Search the bag again," the gray-haired officer barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the boarding calls echoing over the loudspeakers. The younger one obeyed, snapping on latex gloves with a flourish meant more for the crowd than for evidence. He dug deeper this time, pockets flipped, shirts crumpled, laptop shoved aside. A white packet appeared, torn at the seam, dust spilling across the cold tile. Gasps scattered like dominoes. "There it is," someone whispered. "That's drugs, right?" Phone zoomed closer. The officer held the packet high. "Contraband, just like I said." The crowd murmured louder, suspicion spilling into fear. Parents pulled their children behind strollers. A businessman shook his head, whispering into his phone, "They got him." But one passenger didn't buy it. A college student, early 20s, leaned forward, squinting hard. I was standing right there. That wasn't in his bag before. Nobody listened. Not yet. The older officer stepped closer, cuffs clinking. "You're done. Turn around." The man in the gray suit didn't flinch. He raised his chin, eyes steady, letting the silence linger long enough for the cameras to capture it. From the edge of the terminal, an airport supervisor appeared, badge swinging from his lanyard, authority stitched in every step. He folded his arms. "What's the problem here?" The officer answered with smug certainty. "Narcotics in his luggage. He's resisting." The supervisor's gaze barely flicked toward the passenger before nodding. "Proceed. We don't need disruptions." A woman in line gasped. "He didn't resist at all," but her voice was swallowed by the hum of the crowd. The baton tapped against the man's ribs. "Last chance. Hands behind your back." Still, he stayed calm. Not frozen, not afraid. Just calculating. His hand hovered near his jacket. Deliberate. Slow. The officer mistook it for defiance. "Don't move!" The bark was harsh enough to echo off the high glass ceiling. But he wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for the truth. Passengers leaned in, tension wrapping the terminal like a coiled spring. The college student lifted his phone higher, whispering to the record, "This isn't right. Watch closely. They're setting him up." And in that instant, the stage was set. The officers convinced of their power, the supervisor complicit in silence, the crowd teetering between belief and doubt. At the center, one man, still and unshaken, carrying a secret heavy enough to flip the entire terminal upside down. The rope was tightening, and he was ready to pull it. The handcuffs hovered inches from his wrists. The officer's breath was hot with certainty. "Hands behind your back now." But the man in the gray suit didn't move. He stood as if anchored to the tile itself, posture tall, eyes leveled not at the cuffs, not at the officer, but at the room, at the phones, at the witnesses whose silence was starting to shift into unease. Passengers shifted, whispering, "He's not resisting." Why isn't he fighting back? Would you fight back? They'd drag you out faster." A child's voice, high and clear, cut through the murmur. "Mom, why are they hurting him?" The mother hushed quickly, but the question lingered, heavier than any accusation. The officer jabbed again with the baton, sharp enough to sting. "I said now." Still, the man didn't flinch. Instead, he adjusted his cufflinks, slow and deliberate, as though the terminal was a boardroom, and this was just another meeting spiraling off script. His silence was louder than protest. It filled the space, made every clatter of luggage wheels, every boarding announcement, sound like background noise to a play unfolding center stage. The supervisor shifted, uneasy under the weight of the cameras now fixed not on the evidence, but on the officers themselves. "Is this necessary?" a woman demanded from the crowd, phone raised high. The older officer sneered back. "Ma'am, stay out of this. Security protocol." But the calm man's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the officers. No words, just a gaze that said, "Keep recording, you'll want this later." He lifted his hands not behind his back, but forward, palms open, steady. "Look at me," he said, his voice low, almost drowned by the hum of the crowd. "Do I look afraid?" The officer smirked, tightening his grip on the cuffs. "Fear doesn't make you innocent." A ripple of unease passed through the onlookers, because what they saw wasn't fear, it was control. An authority that didn't come from the badge on a lanyard or the baton on a belt, but from somewhere deeper. The younger officer, less certain now, muttered under his breath, "Why is he so calm?" The older one shot back, "Because he thinks silence will save him." But silence wasn't his defense. It was his weapon. The man in the gray suit took one step forward, closing the gap not as prey cornered, but as someone drawing the line. His voice, calm but cutting, carried across the terminal. "You're making a mistake." The baton froze midair. The officer hesitated, and for the first time, doubt flickered across the theater of certainty. because the man's calm wasn't weakness. It was warning, and everyone watching could feel it. The crowd was no longer just an audience. It was restless, uneasy, phones tilted higher, eyes narrowed at the powder on the floor, at the suitcase yanked open too fast, too conveniently. Then came the voice, small, shaky, but enough to cut through the charged silence. I saw his bag," a college student stammered, standing near the gate sign. His phone trembled in his hand, still recording. It was closed, clean. That packet wasn't there until after they touched it. The officers froze for a breath, then laughed, dismissive. "Kid, stay in your lane," the older one barked. "You don't know what you saw." But others heard him. A middle-aged woman with a rolling suitcase turned sharply. "He's right. I was behind them in line. They opened it, and then the white powder showed up." The supervisor bristled, jaw tight, but said nothing. His silence was its own confession. Another voice chimed in this time, steady, deliberate. "I'm recording too." His hands never left his sides, not once. A businessman in a navy blazer held his phone chest high, lens fixed squarely on the officers. The murmur shifted, from passive whispers to active accusations. "They planted that. This isn't right. Look at him, he hasn't moved." The officers glanced at each other, suddenly aware of the red dots circling them like spotlights. Their authority was still intact, but cracks were forming. The gray-suited man didn't thank the witnesses, didn't nod, didn't break his stillness. He didn't need to. Their voices weren't for him. They were for the world, watching through 1,000 tiny screens. The older officer tried to reclaim ground. He raised the packet higher, shaking it for the cameras. Evidence speaks louder than bystanders. But a younger passenger shot back instantly. "So does video. And we've got plenty." Gasps. Applause from somewhere near the back. A ripple of resistance spread through the waiting area, growing louder, sharper. The supervisor stepped forward, desperation leaking into his tone. "Everyone stay calm. This is standard procedure." "No, it's not," the woman with the rolling suitcase snapped, her voice fierce now. "I travel every week. I've never seen a search like this. Not once." Her outburst drew claps. Phones lifted higher. The tide was shifting. The baton officer muttered under his breath, "We're losing control of this crowd." The man in the gray suit finally spoke again, his voice low but precise, cutting through the noise. "You think I'm alone? I'm not." The officers stiffened, because in that moment, they realized the truth. Every phone was a witness. Every voice in the crowd was a jury, and the verdict was turning. The tide was turning, but the men in uniform weren't ready to surrender. Not yet. The airport supervisor stepped forward, authority stitched across his navy jacket, laminated badge bouncing against his chest. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the phones. He locked eyes on the man in the gray suit and delivered his judgment like a gavel. "This is an airport, not a courtroom. We don't take testimony from bystanders. You," he pointed straight at the black man, "are in violation of federal law." Gasps. A ripple of outrage. But he wasn't done. "You people think you can talk your way out of consequences. Not here. Not with me." The words landed heavy. They weren't just about luggage. They weren't just about powder. They carried the weight of something older, uglier. The crowd stiffened. A woman muttered under her breath, "Did he just say you people?" Her phone caught every syllable. The older officer smirked, emboldened. "You heard him. Supervisor says proceed." The cuffs rattled louder, metal clinking like a drumbeat of finality. The college student shouted, voice cracking but fierce, "That's not protocol. You're framing him and everyone here knows it." "Enough," the supervisor barked, spinning toward the witnesses. His voice thundered through the terminal. "Interfere again and you'll all be removed. This is federal security jurisdiction." The passengers recoiled, but they didn't lower their phones. Not this time. The air thickened, charged with defiance. And still, the man in the gray suit hadn't moved. His calmness felt unnatural now, like a storm eye widening while winds screamed around it. He tilted his head, gaze fixed on the supervisor, voice as steady as before. "Are you sure you want to stand by this?" The supervisor's jaw clenched. "I don't answer to you." He turned to the officers. "Finish it." The younger one hesitated, sweat lining his brow. "Sir, the crowd." "I said finish it." The baton lifted again, pressing into the man's chest. "Hands. Behind. Your back." The businessman in the blazer shouted from the side. "This is harassment." "Call it what you want," the supervisor snapped back. "Policy doesn't bend for liars." But policy wasn't what was cracking here. It was perception. It was control, and everyone in that terminal could feel it slipping. The man in the gray suit finally spoke again, each word laid down like stone on marble. You just made this your last mistake. The supervisor scoffed, trying to drown out the unease, clawing at the edges of the crowd. Oh, really? And what are you going to do about it? The silence that followed wasn't weakness. It was warning, and for the first time, the supervisor felt it. The officer yanked the suitcase off the floor, zippers screaming as he dragged it across the tile. He flipped it upside down, letting clothes tumble out like discarded rags. Shirts, files, even a framed photo cracked against the ground. The crowd gasped. "That's personal property!" someone shouted, but the officer only sneered, his voice loud, performative. "Contraband carriers don't get courtesy." He kicked the suitcase aside. It skidded across the polished floor, colliding with a chair leg. The photo lay face down, glass shattered, frame bent. The gray-suited man didn't move to pick it up. He just stared, eyes steady, jaw set. The baton officer pressed closer, cuffs dangling inches from the man's wrists. "This ends now." Metal-kissed skin. Cold. Intentional. The clink was sharp enough to ripple through the terminal. A few passengers flinched, recording hands shaking. "Don't do it," the college student yelled, voice breaking. "Everyone sees this. We're live." But the older officer ignored him, eyes locked on his target. "You thought you could walk through here like you belong? Newsflash, you don't." The words landed like spit, bitter and raw. The man in the gray suit blinked once. No fear, no rush. Just a slow, steady inhale. He remembered. 20 years ago, hands pinned behind his back in a different terminal. No cameras then, no witnesses brave enough to speak. He remembered the shame, the cold room, the way silence felt like chains. Not today. The cuffs closed tighter, officer's knuckles white with force. "Say goodbye to your freedom," he hissed. But before the click could seal, a voice erupted from the crowd. "Stop." The middle-aged woman with the rolling suitcase pushed forward, her phone raised high. Her voice trembled but carried. "You can't put your hands on him, he hasn't even been charged." Another voice joined. "The businessman. He's right. I've got everything on video. If you cuff him, it's evidence of misconduct." The officer faltered, pressure loosening just slightly. The supervisor barked, "Ignore them. Do your job." And yet hesitation lingered. The cuffs dangled, half closed, never fully locking. The gray-suited man lifted his chin, eyes sharp as glass. His voice was low, steady, cutting through the chaos. "You're writing your own downfall." The officer swallowed hard, breath hitching, as if the words carried weight heavier than steel. The crowd pressed closer, phones like glowing torches in the terminal dusk. Whispers surged. "They're going too far. This is abuse." Look at him, he's not even resisting." And there, in the middle of O'Hare, under fluorescent lights and the hum of an airport that suddenly felt like a courtroom, the scene teetered. One push more and the world would know. The cuffs dangled, unfastened but hungry. The officer's hand trembled just enough for the cameras to catch it. The crowd smelled the hesitation, and the tension in the terminal thickened like fog. Then the man in the gray suit moved. Not fast, not reckless, slow, deliberate. His hands slid into the inner pocket of his jacket, every inch measured like a surgeon's cut. The officers stiffened instantly. "Don't move," the older one barked, baton pressed harder into his ribs. The younger one's voice cracked. "He's reaching!" Phones zoomed closer, hearts pounded louder. A ripple of panic spread through the bystanders. Someone gasped, "Is he pulling a weapon?" But the man didn't flinch, didn't speed up, didn't explain. His silence was its own script, forcing the world to watch, to wait. The supervisor snarled, voice booming across the terminal. "Hands out now or we take you down." The man's voice answered, low but sharp. "You've already taken enough." Gasps. The baton froze mid-air. The older officer's jaw clenched. "You think words will save you?" "No." His tone cut like glass. "Proof will." And with that, his hand withdrew, not a fist, not a weapon, but a leather wallet, sleek and worn at the edges. He held it chest high, gripped steady, as if it weighed more than gold. The crowd leaned in. Phones raised higher. The hush that followed was electric. The officer sneered, desperate to reclaim control. "What is this? A bribe?" The man ignored him, fingers tracing the fold of the wallet with deliberate care. He looked not at the officers, not at the supervisor, but at the rows of cameras, at the witnesses, at the jury already forming. "You wanted to search my life," he said evenly. "Time to see what you've missed." The words rippled across the crowd. Someone whispered, "He's got something." Another, "Keep recording." The supervisor scoffed, forcing bravado. "He's bluffing. Arrest him now." But even the younger officer hesitated, his eyes locked on the wallet, unease flickering. What if he's not?" The gray-suited man slowly opened it. A gleam caught the harsh fluorescent light. Metal. Authority pressed into gold and blue enamel, the outline of a seal. The crowd erupted in whispers. "Is that?" "No way." "Oh my God." The older officer froze, hand tightening uselessly on the cuffs. The baton lowered an inch without meaning to. The man's eyes narrowed, his voice no louder than before, but heavy enough to land like thunder. "You're about to learn who I am." The phone surged forward, hungry for the reveal. And in that suspended breath, the terminal wasn't just waiting, it was bracing. Because whatever gleamed inside that wallet, it wasn't ordinary. It was power. And in seconds, the entire airport would see it. The wallet opened with a soft snap, quiet but deafening in the charged silence of the terminal. Nestled inside, polished metal, blue and gold enamel catching the fluorescent lights. The unmistakable seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. Not a credit card, not a licensee. A badge. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Even the boarding announcements fell mute under the weight of the moment. The gray-suited man lifted it higher, slow and steady, until every camera, every eye, could see. Federal Aviation Administration. Senior authority. His voice didn't need to rise. It carried like iron, deliberate and final. Gasps tore through the crowd. "FAA? He works for the FAA. Oh my God, he outranks them." The older officer's smirk shattered, lips parting with a sudden dryness. The baton lowered without command. His hand trembled on the cuffs. The younger officer's face drained pale, his voice little more than a whisper. "That's real." The supervisor staggered, eyes wide. No, it can't be." But his protest was already drowned beneath the roar of realization spreading through the terminal. Passengers pushed forward, phones raised high, capturing every angle of the reveal. Live stream comments scrolled furiously across screens. "He's FAA. Security just tried to frame a federal official." This is going viral right now. The gray-suited man turned the badge toward the officers, the light glinting like a blade. His eyes locked on them with unshaken calm. "You accused a federal officer of smuggling." His words landed heavy, each one a hammer. "You planted evidence. You assaulted me in front of witnesses." The older officer stammered, voice cracking for the first time all day. We didn't know." "That," the man cut in, "was your choice." The crowd erupted, some shouting, some cheering, some jeering at the officers. One woman's voice rang clear above the noise. "You called him a criminal. He's the one who signs your clearances." The younger officer dropped the cuffs, metal clattering to the tile like a guilty confession. His hand recoiled as if burned. The supervisor's face flushed red, sweat streaking his temple. He tried to salvage authority. "This doesn't change the fact." "It changes everything," the man interrupted, his voice a blade slicing through excuses. "You profiled me, you humiliated me, in my jurisdiction." Phones caught the supervisor's silence, his lips working but no sound emerging. His authority had vanished, stripped bare by a wallet no bigger than his palm. The man in the gray suit snapped it shut, the sound sharp as a verdict. "You boys are done." The terminal erupted not in chaos, but in clarity. Every witness knew exactly what had just shifted. Power had changed hands, and the ones who thought they held it now stood exposed. And in the middle of it all, the gray-suited man stood taller than before. His silence no longer misread as weakness, but recognized as control. The sound of the badge snapping shut still echoed when the first crack appeared. The younger officer stepped back, palms up, as if the air around the man in the gray suit had turned radioactive. His voice shook. I didn't know, sir. I was just following." "Orders?" The man cut him off, eyes locked and unblinking. "You had a choice, and you chose wrong." The cuffs lay on the tile, glinting under the harsh light. Useless now. Their clatter had been more than metal. It had been a verdict. The older officer's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Sweat glistened on his temple, dripping down into the collar of his shirt. He had roared commands minutes ago. Now he couldn't string together a single defense. The supervisor, once smug, once certain, was unraveling fastest. His hand clutched at his lanyard, badge swinging wildly, as if the plastic card could shield him from the truth now burning in every phone camera aimed his way. This doesn't mean... It means exactly what it looks like. The gray-suited man cut in, voice cold steel. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping like a chorus. You tried to frame him. He's FAA and you humiliated him. This is going online right now. Passengers surged closer, no longer timid. A businessman jabbed his finger toward the supervisor. I saw you nod when they planted that packet. Don't lie. You signed off on this. The supervisor's face drained. That's not what happened. But even he didn't sound like he believed it. The woman with the rolling suitcase held her phone higher, lens trembling with fury. I'm live right now. Thousands are watching. Your career is over. The older officer snapped, desperate. Turn those cameras off. This is federal property. But the gray-suited man's voice boomed back, louder now, carrying the authority of every rung he had climbed to get here. No, this is accountability. And it's long overdue. The younger officer's knees buckled. He muttered to himself, I didn't sign up for this. His baton clattered to the floor, forgotten. Gasps rippled again, but this time not in fear, in recognition. The power dynamic had flipped. The uniform no longer commanded respect. The silence no longer suggested guilt. The truth was standing, tall and unshaken, in a gray suit. The supervisor tried one last push, though his voice cracked. You can't just walk in here and threaten federal officers. The man stepped closer, so close the cameras caught every word, every syllable etched with controlled fury. I don't have to threaten you. Your actions already convicted you. In front of witnesses, in front of the world. Phones lifted higher. People cheered. The roar of approval, outrage, vindication filled the terminal like applause after a verdict. And there, amid the chaos, the officers and the supervisor shrank, their authority dissolving under the weight of truth and the glint of a badge they never expected to see. The collapse wasn't loud. It was quiet and complete. The terminal had turned into a courtroom, and the verdict was already written. But the man in the gray suit wasn't finished. He stepped forward, the weight of his presence pushing the officers back without him needing to touch them. Every camera caught it control without force, authority without shouting. His voice was deliberate, every syllable landing like a judge's gavel. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty. The older officer's mouth fell open. You can't. I can, and I just did. Gasps scattered through the crowd, followed by cheers. The woman with the suitcase clapped once, sharp and certain. Others joined, the sound swelling until it echoed across the glass ceiling. The younger officer stammered, I was just following... The man's gaze cut him down mid-sentence. You followed prejudice, not protocol. You chose this. The supervisor stepped forward, voice cracking under the weight of desperation. You don't have the authority to... The wallet snapped open again, badge gleaming, shutting him down mid-breath. FAA oversight trumps local protocol. You profiled a federal officer on federal property. Congratulations, you've just terminated yourself. Oh. Phones caught every word, the crowd erupting like a jury delivering justice. Fire him! Someone shouted. Lock them out of the system! Another voice demanded. The man nodded once, as if confirming their verdict. He pressed a button on his phone, sleek and black. Nia, he said calmly, voice carrying. A crisp voice answered instantly through the speaker. Yes, sir, standing by. Freeze their credentials. Effective now. And flag this incident for federal review. The line clicked. Done. The older officer's radio buzzed in his hand, then went silent. He pressed it again and again, but the line was dead. His access revoked in real time. The younger officer checked his ID badge. It flashed red against the scanner by the gate. Locked out. The supervisor pulled his phone, tapping furiously. His face drained. I'm locked out too. The crowd erupted, half cheering, half filming, the tide of justice flooding over the men who had moments ago stood so tall. The gray-suited man didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply delivered the final line like it had been rehearsed his whole life. You thought silence meant weakness. It meant patience, and it just ran out. The applause that followed wasn't chaotic. It was deliberate, measured, rising like a wave behind him. The officers stood pale and trembling, stripped of power in front of the very crowd they had tried to manipulate. And for the first time all day, the man in the gray suit allowed himself to exhale not relief, not victory, but resolve, because this wasn't the end. It was the reckoning. The echo of applause still lingered when the man in the gray suit turned, surveying the terminal like a commander reclaiming ground. The officers stood hollow, stripped of authority, radios silent, badges useless. The supervisor slumped against the counter, his breath shallow, eyes darting like a trapped animal. But the man didn't look at them anymore. His gaze swept past toward the witnesses, the passengers, the cameras that had never stopped recording. "This wasn't about me," he said, voice steady, low, but amplified by the silence that followed. It was about every traveler profiled before they even opened their mouth, about every voice silenced by someone in a uniform who thought power excused prejudice. The crowd leaned in, phones trembling to catch every word. A murmur rose, not of fear, but of recognition. He continued, "Justice isn't loud. It doesn't scream, or shove, or curse. Justice is quiet, decisive, unshakable, and today, you all saw it." Applause swelled again, louder now, rhythmic, purposeful. Some cheered, others cried. A child clapped with tiny hands, echoing the thunder of grown voices around him. The woman with the rolling suitcase wiped her eyes, whispering, "About time someone stood up to them." The businessman nodded, muttering, "He didn't even raise his voice. That's power." The officers shrank further, drowned not by force, but by shame. Their downfall wasn't a headline, it was happening in real time, broadcast live, irreversible. The man in the gray suit gathered his belongings slowly, calmly, leaving the shattered frame on the floor like a symbol of what had already been broken beyond repair. Before walking away, he turned once more, eyes piercing the supervisor, the officers, and then the crowd. "You called me a criminal," he said, tone sharp as a blade. "But the only crime today was yours, and the whole world just saw it." The supervisor's lips parted, but no sound came. He was finished, the silence louder than any plea. The man adjusted his tie, squared his shoulders, and walked through the terminal. No guards, no escorts. Just presence dignity heavy enough to part the sea of passengers that moved aside instinctively, reverently. Phones stayed raised, capturing every step, the chat feeds scrolling like wildfire. Legend. Silent power. This is history. As he passed the gate, the boarding announcement chimed again. Ordinary words returning to an extraordinary space. But nothing in that terminal was ordinary anymore. Because in less than an hour, a narrative had flipped. A man accused, framed, nearly shackled, revealed himself not as prey, but as judge. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He simply was. And in that stillness, in that clarity, he had dismantled an entire performance of prejudice with nothing but truth and patience. The final image. A black man in a gray suit, FAA badge tucked away, walking calmly toward his flight. Not humiliated, not broken, unshaken. Justice had spoken.